Hey everyone, what's going on? So in today's video, I wanted to talk about a shower thought that I've been sitting on for some time, which is the idea of, which reviewers you should be trusting, and in relation to that, the paradox of reviewers with quote unquote golden ears or above average hearing. So the paradox is this basically. The better a reviewer's hearing is, the less representative their experience is likely to be of the average listener and their audience. So someone with unusually good hearing is going to have a propensity to recommend products that are more out of reach in terms of price for the average listener, and in addition to that, shy away from recommending products that the average listener might actually find to sound quite good. Now on the flip side of things, this is usually the appeal of a newer listener. So someone with more average hearing who uses more down-to-earth language and is able to communicate an experience that resonates better with the average listener. So what I'll do now is I will give and make this more concrete with an example, which is the audible hearing range for listeners of varying ages. So if you're not familiar with this concept, basically humans can usually hear from a range of 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And this is the audible spectrum that we hear in terms of frequency. With that being said, this is an ideal range that is usually tokened only by younger individuals and like babies and children and stuff like that. As we get older, our hearing naturally diminishes and our ability to hear those higher frequencies, it goes down over time. And this is basically why older individuals might struggle to hear higher frequency noises like sirens or high-pitched whines, for example. So just using myself as an example, I am 25 years old and I can reliably hear up to around 17,000 hertz. My left ear is a little bit better than my right ear actually. I think my right ear tops out at around, well, it does go up to 17,000 hertz. It just sounds quieter in that ear than in the left ear. And this is something, if you're curious about, by the way, first you need an IM that extends that high, but then you can go on like a sine sweep generator and start playing those sounds and seeing if you can hear them reliably. Now, with all that being said, my ability to hear up until like 17,000 hertz, it fundamentally alters my experience with a lot of IMs, especially higher end IMs, which exhibit that treble extension up into those ranges. For me at least, when I hear peaks in the upper treble past like 15,000 hertz, for example, not only do they sound potentially fatiguing to me, but they also fundamentally alter the timbre of the IM sound to me. When I say timbre, this is mostly a reference to the overall color of an IM sound. So whether it's warm, metallic, grainy, so on and so forth. So yeah, let's say we have an IM that peaks at like 17,000 hertz. Most likely that's going to make that IM more fatiguing for me depending on the amplitude of that peak, as well as just make the overall timbre more like light and like feathery to me. Now comparatively, let's say we take an older listener, someone with worse hearing than me, that cannot hear up into those regions. It's highly probable that they would not hear that peak at all, so that peak would not be fatiguing to them. And in addition to that, the overall timbre of the IM would be altered as well. They would likely hear a more warm and more smooth and more forgiving presentation versus what I hear. And on the flip side of this, someone with better hearing than me, or even a cat or a dog, might hear something entirely different than what I hear, just because, that IM could extend even further than 20,000 hertz. And they might find it even more fatiguing than I find it. So in essence, this is the conundrum that I run into as a reviewer. Yes, there are sometimes sets that I do not like, and I will express as much. I will say straight up, I do not like this set. However, at the same time, I do try to make concessions and try to understand how someone else might listen to this set and who it might appeal to, irrespective of whether I do not necessarily like the sound of that set. Now, if I really dunk on an IM, it's usually because it's genuinely really bad. It's because I think that there is another IM that comes in at a cheaper price point and offers comparable performance. Or 3, it's because it's an IM with a sound signature that I think falls outside of what would appeal to the majority of listeners. Okay, so what's my take on, which reviewers you should be trusting and what you should be looking for in a reviewer? When it comes to myself, I don't think, again, I'm probably the best person to be asking about this, just because I don't trust anyone's impressions more than my own. And I don't say this out of arrogance necessarily. This is just confidence that is built off of years of listening to hundreds of IMs, understanding my preferences, and knowing that my impressions have lined up with measurable data in the past. With that being said, if I could go back in time to when I first entered the hobby, what I would be looking for most in a reviewer is a combination of 1, consistency, and then 2, their ability to communicate. So the reason why consistency matters is because it allows you to calibrate someone else's impressions to your own. For example, if someone consistently likes everything, then you can probably assume that their impressions are pretty useless outside of making you feel good about a purchase decision or hyping you up for a purchase decision. On the other hand, if a reviewer consistently dislikes IMs with aggressive 3 kHz pin notches, aggressive mid-ranges, then you can probably discount their negativity when it comes to an IM that they're reviewing with that sound signature. Now, the caveat to this is that you do have to express nuance. If there is an IM with a strong bass shelf, for example, that balances out that aggressive 3 kHz pin notch, there is a strong possibility that that reviewer will actually like that IM with the aggressive pin notch, whereas you would probably dislike it because the balance has just been entirely shifted with the overall frequency response. That in mind, we come to the second thing that I would really be looking for, which is communication, and that reviewer's ability to articulate what they're hearing and who that impression would likely appeal to and resonate with. And honestly, I don't think I'm the best communicator. I am naturally a very introverted person, so it's taken a lot of practice for me to get used to sitting in front of the camera, talking to you guys, and explaining my thoughts. At the same time though, I would say that's what kind of excites me about communication. It is a skill with no ceiling, and it's something that I really want to get better at as I continue to make these reviews and videos for you guys. Okay, so finally what I'll add here is that objective reviews are really not as useful as you might think. With audio, a purely objective review mostly just comes down to specs and measurements. The problem with this is that you really need the human experience to fully understand what that measurable data means and what it might sound like to you. And I will give 2 examples of why the human element is so important when it comes to audio, and I will do so by kind of just breaking down why measurements are not always representative of what you'd hear. So first, measurements can be manipulated. And I say this in the sense that if we look at a frequency response of an IM, for example, if you apply smoothing, if you stretch the y-axis, it's going to make a measurement look better a lot of the time. It's going to look smoother, it's going to look just better sounding in general. So a second example of how measurements can be manipulated to make a product look better is simply by omission. So a reviewer might choose to omit measurements that make a product look bad, and this in turn puts the focus on measurements that make a product look good. So in reality, the presentation of measurements and how they are framed are often affected by subjective biases as well. So a final example I'll give of why I think the human experience is so important when it comes to audio is just looking at 2 IMs that measure very similarly. Let's say, we have an existing IM that measures pretty decently and it sounds good to a lot of listeners. Sometimes a second IM will come out at a cheaper price point, for example, that measures very similarly to that existing IM that everyone knows sounds good. So on paper at least, this builds a lot of hype because we assume that that second IM is going to sound very similar to the first one and it's going to be cheaper. It sounds like a great option. Unfortunately, a lot of the time this can be misleading because when you actually hear those 2 IMs in practice, they will sound very different to each other. So a big reason for this difference is often the treble response of these 2 IMs. There is a lot more information in the treble, and while it is captured visually by measurements, at least subtly, the difference is often a lot more obvious in actual listening. Honestly, I think I might make a separate video on this topic of measurement manipulation and why objective reviews are not ideal in audio, just because I think that this is very interesting to me as someone who is a data analyst. Anyways, I guess the bottom line of this video is don't look for the reviewers with the best ears. Yes, all else being equal, the reviewer with the better ears is obviously the person that you should be trusting more, but usually when it comes to audio, what matters most is a reviewer's ability to communicate and for their experience to resonate with what you're hearing. And yeah, I think that's going to do it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope it was informative, and I will catch you guys in my next video.